Welcome to Praxis, a podcast where we explore how to practice and embody the way of Jesus in our everyday lives. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Hey, we are in a series right now on emotional maturity and how it's essential to discipleship. So we believe that Jesus had more EQ than any other person that has ever walked the planet, and that he consistently embodied emotional maturity. So if we're going to grow as disciples of Jesus, we must too grow our emotional maturity. So today we had a great discussion on relational management. What stood out to you guys?
Maybe one thing I would share is we had a moment in our discussion today where one of you said, man, this is complicated. And right at the beginning here, I would probably say, yes, this is complicated. This is hard work. We don't arrive. It's not like we graduate from this. This is like a lifelong thing. And so don't, as you listen to this and hear all the different ins and outs of relational management, don't beat yourself up. Just kind of start where you are and continue to take your next step towards growth.
Yeah, I mean, we're the ones talking about it, and we're certainly not perfect.
Nope.
Yeah, it's hard work, but it's so worth it. I think the goal that is set out in front of us is that we would be healthy people, connected to ourselves, to God, and people around us, have healthy relationships. Like, this is like a positive vision for being able to live out the kingdom but that kingdom being a part of us, and meaning we are transformed people who are connected to the people around us. So there's obviously a huge gain from doing this, but it is going to take some work.
Yeah. Be kind to yourself.
I like that. I have a shirt that says that. Well, let's get into it. Here's our conversation on relational management.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mac.
I'm Josiah.
And I'm Katie.
So, as you both know, we just got back from Glacier National Park. We've been to like 20-some national parks in the last 4 or 5 years, and this one was by far my favorite. One of my favorite parts of our trip was wildlife encounters. I was hoping to see tons of bear. We only saw a few, but we did see a ton of moose. Have you guys ever seen a moose in real life?
No.
I don't think, well, maybe once when I was a kid.
You guys, I was standing on this like kind of beach area next to this lake, and a massive moose swims by like 15 feet in front of me. These animals are huge. Yeah. And I didn't know, ridiculously good swimmers. They can dive down 20 feet, hold their breath for a minute.
I didn't know they dove.
Yeah. And they have these like, I think some animals have this, so they're not the only ones, but they have like this special lens in their eyeball. So when they go underwater, it's like goggles.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
I just learned this yesterday. I think I was listening to a podcast. What is the largest predator to a moose? Not like what attacks them most often, not frequency, but what is the largest animal that is a common predator to a moose?
I have no idea.
I'm not even going to try to take a stab at that.
Orcas, apparently.
Really?
Because they swim, and orcas.
What's an orca?
What's an orca?
Yeah.
A whale.
Oh, a whale. Okay.
Interesting. Well, that must be on
The coast.
most of them on the coast.
Yeah.
Very
Just thought that was interesting.
Well, anyway, man, I was just blown away by that. And it got me thinking, like, when was the last time you were just blown away by, like, a creature?
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, they're bigger than you think.
They're huge. And more dangerous than if you startle them. Or they, at one point we saw a cow moose with 2 babies that were still nursing. Like, if you get between, they're very protective. So anyway, it was just fascinating and not something you see when you're sitting in a closed room recording a podcast. Is unbelievable.
Yeah, we definitely miss out on nature stuff in a city area,
We have some mice in our garage right now.
Wildlife.
That's
That's
the extent
exciting.
of the
There
wildlife.
is a bear that crossed the freeway into Oconomowoc, where we
Big
live.
news, yeah.
That's
Heard about
that's
that.
big news.
There's a lot of bears in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You know
I'm
what?
excited
Mostly
about that.
north of here.
I take that back. We had a beaver in our backyard
In
recently.
the woods.
In the woods. In the creek in the woods.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool.
That is
A
cool.
beaver.
What's that?
Nature.
Nature.
Well, speaking of scary animal encounters, we are in a series on emotional intelligence.
Nice.
Right, so we're in this series on emotional maturity, where we're looking at sort of 4 components that comprise emotional intelligence. I think one thing that makes what we're doing maybe a bit unique compared to other conversations about this is that we're attempting to do this while keeping our eyes focused on Jesus and how we see this play out in the life of Jesus. So to see how he embodied things like that. So far we've talked about self-awareness, self-regulation, and social awareness. And today we're going to discuss the ins and outs of relational management. So let's start just by defining what are we talking about? What is relational management? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so one definition is relational management refers to our ability to communicate clearly, maintain good relationships with others, connect with those from other cultures, work well in teams, and manage conflict. So I think what we're talking about here is using our awareness of our own emotions and those of others to manage interactions successfully. So I see this kind of as putting together the last 3 buckets that we've talked about, right? We talked about self-awareness, what am I feeling? Self-regulation, how do I show up in spite of or because of what I'm thinking and feeling? And then social awareness, what are other people thinking and feeling, and how are they showing up? And I picture this bucket as putting all of those together, like putting all of the inputs. Let's use like a Tesla, for example, right? Like you're driving a Tesla, it's got this smart little computer, it looks at like where are the other cars in the lanes, how fast are they going, how should I, and then making the calculation, how should I maneuver given the landscape around me? You're sort of like taking all that in and then figuring out how do I show up in the context of relationship with other people.
Yeah, I too see it as sort of the sum total, the culmination or integration of all that we've been talking about so far. You know, it's the integration of self-awareness, self-regulation, and social awareness in a way that informs how I show up with a mature presence. One of the things that I think is really important when we begin talking about relational management is that one could hear that phrase and assume we're talking about managing other people. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we're talking about. That would actually be a sign of relational immaturity, in my opinion. So we're not talking about managing other people. We're talking about managing ourselves in relationship to other people. So the focus is still on ourselves. And I think this is ridiculously important because there's this tendency, I think almost all of us have, when we learn some tools or resources or get a little bit of information or whatever, is to immediately sort of look outward and use it to stand in judgment over other people. So we sort of we can easily weaponize tools or content or information as we stand in judgment over other people. And you know, Jesus, honestly, he had a lot to say about this. When he talks about judgment, he talks about how we're supposed to consider the plank in our own eye before trying to take the speck out of someone else's eye. So he really pushes back on this tendency we have to use tools and resources to immediately sort of like size up other people rather than attending to maybe our own growth areas.
Yeah, it's really easy to see how the skills of relational management could turn into a manipulative strategy really quickly.
Yeah, and if, you know, those listening who are part of our community in our discipleship groups and leadership intensives, we actually have language that helps give like maybe some metaphors that help us avoid that tendency. So, for instance, what comes to mind for me is we talk about a picture, a mirror, and a window. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at a tool, like this EQ matrix, first and foremost, it gives us a picture of Jesus. We look at Jesus to give us a picture of what emotional maturity or intelligence looks like. Then secondly, as we look at Jesus, that becomes a mirror to look at ourselves, to examine our own lives. And then finally, it becomes a window through which we can sort of assess our relational interactions or the cultures and organizations that we participate in, right? So it just felt like, for me at least, it felt important to name at the beginning, yes, this is a sum total of everything we've been talking about, sort of integrating and putting it all together. But it'd be easy to sort of think relational management means managing other people, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about managing yourself in relationship to other people. And this actually connects to a much deeper conviction that we have, which is anytime we're exposed to new material, new content, new tools, first and foremost, it's about us working on ourselves, not sort of using that content to point out other people's deficiencies or weaknesses.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this almost every week, but if you skip to any of these steps that we've been going in order, if you skip any of these steps, I think that's when you get into trouble. And I don't know if any of you have ever been with someone, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it at times, but when you skip to relational management before doing the work of being self-aware, self-regulating, and being able to, socially become aware of what's going on around you, it turns into manipulation really quickly. And I don't know if you've ever been, especially like if you had a leader who was trying to get you to do something, clearly they have practiced the skills of relational management, right? And I just use air quotes for those of you who weren't in the room with me.
If you couldn't see it.
But really what they're doing is just manipulating you to do what they think you should be doing. And most of the time that's just management strategy for their own anxiety that they're not aware of.
Yes. And this is probably, we could do an entirely like a separate podcast or even series on this. But maybe a way to capture what we're saying is there is a difference between relational management and relational manipulation, and we must not confuse the two. And I think to your point, Josiah, within leadership contexts, it is very common for leaders to operate out of relational manipulation and even be rewarded for it.
Yeah.
So, maybe another date, we'll circle back to that and how that shows up.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, one phrase I think that you've coined, Mac, is managing self in relationship.
I don't know if I coined that, but I have been using it.
Well, okay. I heard it from you.
Locally coined.
Yeah.
And I like that because it's kind of like, look, every relationship is almost like a dance. Like you make a move, I make a move. You make a move, and knowing what are my anxieties and triggers and how do I respond when I'm triggered and what are your triggers and how do you respond and then how do I react to that? Like especially people that we've been in relationship with for a long time, we sort of develop these patterns and dynamics. And I think we all do this to an extent, right? We all are to some extent managing ourselves in the context of relationship, but there are varying degrees of competency, right? And even within each of us, sometimes we do this really well and sometimes we do it not so well. So what would you say it looks like when someone who has a high degree of relational management steps into this?
So Katie, last time you said when it comes to social awareness, if you were to kind of just like summarize it big picture, it's the ability to read the room. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, maybe I could try to take a stab at going big picture when it comes to relational management. What is that? I would say it's the ability to see the emotional system, the web of relationships, and manage oneself within that system. So, by system, I mean exactly what you were just referring to. We exist in a web of relationships where there's relational fusion that takes place and automatic reactions and ways of relating, these patterns sort of take over. And so someone who has a high degree of relational management is able to see those patterns, those reactions within the web of relationships and how they're then participating in it. You used the metaphor of dancing, And sometimes we use the idea of getting on the balcony. It comes from this book, The Leadership on the Line. But imagine for a second you are at, a wedding reception and the dance, breaks out. And so everybody's dancing on the dance floor. Getting on the balcony is the ability to maybe transcend, get above that, and you see how everybody else is dancing, their relational interactions, and you see yourself on the dance floor, how you're then participating in all those relational interactions. So I would say big picture, someone with a high degree of relational management is able to see the system, their participation in that system while staying self-differentiated, which is the ability to be defined and connected to the other people on the dance floor, which at the very least will involve staying calm when anxiety is high, remaining connected relationally to the people within the system rather than going to distance or cutoff, and staying the course, meaning they're able to define themselves rather than just let other people define who they are.
That sounds really complicated.
It is complicated.
Well, all I'm thinking about is when there is a dance party, I don't leave the dance floor.
I know. Right. You just do burpees and kind of lose yourself in the moment.
And I don't want anyone else in the ballroom.
Okay. This is a story.
You do burpees as a dance
It
move?
happened.
It happened.
In a bridesmaid dress.
I have not heard this story.
Probably around the time that Mac was deciding whether or not to hire me.
Yep. It was a couple years ago, and it was her sister's. It was kind of like how would you, she got
They were
married
supposed to
during
get
COVID.
married summer of 2020. So they ended up doing a small ceremony with just family. And then 2021 ended up being the reception part of it.
I think that's kind of a cool idea anyway.
Well, anyway, from what I hear, Katie goes to bed at 7:34 each night. She's not a night person, but if you get her cranked up past 10 p.m. in a public setting, she goes nuts.
With music.
Yeah, with music.
Let's be clear.
It was an eye-opener, we'll just put
Especially
it that way.
if there's some Beyonce.
Yes. It was
I'm there for it.
Shenanigans. So I don't know. What else would you guys say? I know it does sound complicated, but I'm just saying a person with a high degree of relational management is able to see the relational system and sort of notice how they're participating in it. But maybe let's simplify it a little bit. What other characteristics, what does this actually look like for someone with a high degree of relational management? What other things would you add?
Yeah, I would add, I think people who are skilled at this tend to be good at relationships, both building relationships and maintaining them. And it makes sense, right? If you're in tune with yourself and again, what your anxieties, what your triggers are, how you react when you're triggered, and you can say the same for other people, I think you're going to be equipped to navigate relationships in a healthy way. And I might add one of the hallmarks, I think, of having healthy relationships is the ability to set boundaries. Setting boundaries in a relationship just means being clear about what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. It means being able to state what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. So I think people who are aware of the social emotional landscape that we're talking about, people who can perceive and regulate their own emotional state and perceive the emotional state of other people, they're going to be able to say things like, I'm not able to go to that event with you tonight because I'm just not in a good headspace right now. Or, I'm not really able to talk about that because I'm still upset or I'm still grieving. And not only can they set their own boundaries, they can also respect the boundaries of other people. If I'm spending time with someone and...
No, I don't want to do burpees on the dance floor. I'm out.
That would be a boundary. Or be even perceiving, hey, it seems like you're having a hard day. Would you like to talk about it or do you need space right now?
Yeah.
Those are just common everyday ways of having boundaries. And I think boundaries help us define what we need in the context of relationship, right? They help us define what is ours and what is someone else's. To say, this is my emotion and I'm not asking you to take this on. And I can see your emotion and I'm not going to take that on. I can be here for you, but I'm clear about what's mine and what's yours and what a healthy relationship looks like in that respect. So I think boundaries are absolutely essential if we want to manage ourselves in relationship in healthy ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said building and maintaining them. What that provokes for me is I once worked with someone who told me they've never had a lifelong friendship. I thought, I wonder, is that not a bit of a red flag?
Yeah.
potentially does that not speak to the ability to develop and maintain friendships over time?
That definitely came to mind for me too. That was the first thing I was going to say is I wonder if maybe there's not a perfect way to gauge it, but if I guess I'll say I know people who probably would have assumed or said they were good at relationships, but they also, if you look at their history, have a wake of fallouts with people.
Yep.
And that speaks to a lot of things. So sometimes it's due to a lack of boundaries. Maybe you're like too enmeshed. You're like so close that it can't possibly like survive without something happening. Or a lot of that relational capacity is just manipulation. And you're like finding a way to stay close to people in their lives, but eventually something goes wrong, or you don't, character flaw or a fall from something, and pretty soon, stuff blows up.
Well, Josiah and Adam, you guys go back to what? Preschool?
Middle school.
Middle
almost.
school.
Same thing.
Practically.
But
Maturity-wise.
I think we would have, though. We didn't meet until middle school.
That's true. Yeah.
So,
Well,
I remember, just to say one more thing about boundaries, I remember being in college and meeting a friend who had really strong boundaries. And I remember actually feeling like that was really refreshing to me as someone who can feel, kind of pressure to be overly aligned and overly agreeable. I just remember her being able to say things like, yeah, I don't want to do that today, or I don't agree with that. And I felt so much freedom in that because it was like this idea that, oh, that's great. Like, I guess I have permission to say those things too. I have permission to be myself and to not do things that I don't want to do, or not pretend that I agree or feel a certain way that I don't. And it actually taught me something really important about how to have sustainable friendships, right, over the long term. And she and I are still friends. I'm seeing her in a couple of weeks. But it was a light bulb moment for me.
so she modeled something that gave you vision and imagination for your own life.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And I would imagine there was times when that was annoying, the boundaries.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Boundaries
Yeah.
are always annoying.
Yes.
Like you wanted to,
And it was
you
different.
wanted to do something with her.
I
And
want
she's
to do
like,
burpees on
"No,
the
I'm
dance
not."
floor, and you're saying
I
no.
want to go dancing all night.
Sabotaging
No, I
my
don't want
fun.
to.
And it was different. I remember thinking, oh, I'm not used to this.
Yeah.
What other characteristics? So we got good at relationships.
Yeah, I think another one is being good at engaging in what we would call crucial conversations, which comes from a book that we read as a staff. Essentially, when there's disagreement, when emotions are high, and when the stakes are high, that sort of equals the crucial conversation. And being able to manage those and relate to those well is a skill.
Yep.
And I think I think it's all three of these buckets, right? The self-awareness, the social awareness, the self-regulation, all of that comes into play when you're sitting across from the table with someone who's mad at you and you're figuring out how to navigate within it.
Yeah, you have to manage your own reactivity and not kind of blow up, puff up, or shrink back.
Yeah.
You have to listen to the opinions or viewpoints of others while also be willing to state your own. You have to try to create conversational conditions that convey safety for the other person. There's a lot to manage with, and I would recommend that resource. Crucial Conversations is a great book. It's kind of a required reading for our staff because we want to press into tough terrain conversationally. We're assuming that we're going to have difficult conversations, and with difficult conversations comes the requirement of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is holding tension in those conversations is really important.
Yeah.
And holding tension in a healthy, mature way.
Yeah, being able to say, I feel like I'm right, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. We get this really binary set of eyes, right? Like if I have a point to prove, that means your point's wrong and my job is to convince you. And being able to take space to say, well, what if both of the things we want are both valuable? How do we hold those long enough until we can both, things can calm down and we can agree on something? I think a great way to practice this, by the way, is with your kids, because you have the power in the dynamic And it is a great practice of laying down that power to treat your kid, who maybe is only 10 or 11 years old, with respect enough to hear their opinion, to hear them out, to create safety, to stay calm when they're probably going to be crazy emotionally. It's a great place to start practicing with your kids.
Yep. If you can relate to your children with maturity, you can relate to anyone with maturity.
Yeah, it's true. I think a lot of that is the power dynamic at play.
Yep.
Because you have it. At any moment, you can just be like, because I said so.
It's power and lack of accountability. I mean, quite frankly, we wouldn't blow up or yell in a workplace most of the time, but like we do at home, because like it's not the same degree of accountability.
Yeah, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe another one I would add, and this relates to crucial conversations because maybe this is a form of one, but people with a high degree of relational management are able to receive constructive feedback. That in ways that help them grow. They're able to hear people out, take it on the chin, and learn and grow from it. And in a way, they just avoid some of the common pitfalls I see when people receive feedback. One pitfall is just to become super defensive and dismissive of, the feedback. Another one, though, that I've noticed recently that's super common is just to become overly sensitive and almost be wrecked by the feedback. Mm-hmm. And both of those, I would say, are sort of immature responses to feedback.
Yeah, yeah. Where your response to the feedback is going to cause that other person and others who might have feedback to feel like they have to walk on eggshells,
right?
When they have something they have an issue with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So feedback is never fun, especially when it hits close to home. But those with a high degree of relational management are they're able to regulate themselves in that moment and then be open to hearing the essence of where there might be a growth opportunity.
This one was probably my biggest growth opportunity, I'll call it, throughout young adulthood. This took the most work for me.
Why do you think that is?
It's hard to really not take things personally.
Mm-hmm.
It exposes insecurities. So if someone has an issue with something I did as a worship leader, there would be, it's a reaction not just to the thing I did, but now it's an attack of who I am.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have what it takes to be a leader. And you have a choice in that moment to either accept it and try to grow, or you get defensive and you push back, and you discredit them for anything they have to say because they're this, and that, and then you sort of create this enemy out of them, and they're attacking me, and now they're sort of anti what God wants in my life, and you start to create distance. I have a story that I won't fully share, but from my previous church when I was really young in leadership, a lesson I learned the hard way, because this person ended up leaving the church, had issues, and honestly, most of the issues, when I look back, were valid. I should have been able to sit down and listen, and be able to find not just common ground, but to be able to receive it. I was a young, immature leader, and I made mistakes, and I should have just owned them. But instead, I created this distance. I got defensive. I got other people on my side, and now this person isn't a part of the church anymore. And when I look back on it, I realize I think we could have saved that.
Yeah.
Just with being more mature and being able to receive that, I think it would have created some connection there.
I think that, being part of church leadership or leadership in general, you just receive a lot more feedback anytime you're trying to lead something. And it comes in a variety of forms. I think when you get a lot of fans who are going to sing your praises and affirm maybe a sermon or whatever. So you get it comes with a high degree of praise. What people often don't realize is that it also comes with a high degree of critique and criticism. I think this burned out a lot of pastors during COVID. They just became kind of an emotional punching bag for people's angst.
Yeah.
But at least for me, I'll just narrate. I always want to try to stay even-keeled, regulated, and try to examine, be open to, is there a nugget of truth here for me that I can take to heart and learn and grow from? But at the same time, I'll just name, not all feedback for me is equal. I try not to listen or put a lot of, I try not to put too much on feedback from fans or foes. People who either love me and, are just kind of like, hey, you're the next this person. You know what I mean? They're going to sing your praises, or they clearly are like, nothing you do is going to make them happy. They're just angry. I've tried to cultivate in my life friends who will speak the truth to me for my good, even when it's hard and difficult. And I think we all need people like that. But even in those contexts, you still need that relational management where you can stay calm enough to hear the substance of what needs to be appropriated.
Yeah, and before we move on from that, I think that a good gauge for your own life to know how well you're doing. I know we'll probably talk more about practices as we get forward, as we move forward. But if the friends in your life, if you receive no feedback from your friends in your life, it's probably a sign that they're like, either they might be afraid to bring it up.
I was once part of a 360 in an organization where everybody had to undergo a 360 review. People above them, peers below. And one of the individuals who did the 360 told me their feedback was, I'm not good at receiving feedback. Like, we can't even get started until you're able to receive feedback.
Yeah. I mean, just the other day, Adam and I had a conversation, and he brought up something that was like, hey, are you sure you're thinking about this clearly? Just something going on in personal life. And I appreciated that, like, that my friends can be like, hey, like, I'm noticing something.
Hold up.
Yeah, like, it's not this big challenge. It's just how you maintain an openness to wanting to grow. And if you have none of that in your life, you might have isolated yourself from it, because I'm certain people think it.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of running long here. But just real quick, any other characteristics that either of you would say, hey, let's just name these as key ingredients to relational management or key characteristics?
Yeah, I jotted down collaboration. I think I really liked what you were just saying earlier, Josiah, about when we talk with our kids and we think it's either my way or your way. You guys familiar with the phrase like a zero-sum game?
Yes.
Like there's a set number of chips and they're either all yours or they're all mine. But in collaboration, sometimes it's like that, but more often than not, it's not a zero-sum game. And oftentimes the best solution lies in working through all these different ideas. And so I think collaboration requires holding my own ideas with some humility, being able to receive and actively listen to other people, not getting defensive, and building on what you just said, being able to receive feedback and input from other people.
Yeah.
Going back to Brene Brown, we've talked about in previous episodes, not puffing up, not shrinking back, right? Not saying, oh, no, I'm sure your ideas are the best, so I'm not even going to share, but also not saying, here's what I think, and if this doesn't go my way, I'm going to
Pout.
get really ticked and pout
angry.
or step out of the room.
Yeah. I've heard Trish Taylor in a podcast, she named it as when you hold two things in tension, if you hold them long enough, a third way emerges. And if you try to, if you're willing to hold both of them long enough, and people are mature enough to sit down at the table long enough to not leave, eventually a third way will emerge in which both people can collaborate and move forward together.
And a simple linguistic key there is the word and. So often we respond to someone who says something we disagree with, and our first response is but. And it's been a practice of mine to hear what someone else is saying, and instead of responding with but, respond with and. I hear what you're saying, and this other thing can also be true.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we find that it's not a zero-sum game, but chips actually multiply, on the table before us.
Yeah, I think one more thing would just be leadership, which we've talked a lot about already. This is someone who is able to lead and to do so with not just integrity, but also connection.
Yeah, they lead out of influence rather than position. You know what I mean? That's been my experience. one of the things we're doing throughout this series is we're trying to fix our eyes on Jesus, going, hey, the individual who best embodied emotional maturity is Jesus Christ. Where do you see Jesus integrating all that we've been talking about in this series, embodying relational management?
I was looking at Luke 14 recently. So Jesus dines at the house of a prominent Pharisee, and it says he was being carefully watched. So he knows this group of people are watching him closely, likely because they're hoping to catch him in a trap, as they often did with Jesus. They were always just sort of waiting, hoping to catch him in breaking a rule or a law or messing up in some way. And he knew that. He knew that people were looking to catch him. And so he goes into this dinner knowing their intentions, and that knowledge seems to influence how he showed up. He ends up seeing a man in the story. He sees a man suffering from swelling in his body. But before he heals him, he turns and asks the Pharisees, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Which of you, if he has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath, would not immediately pull it out? So I just see Jesus skillfully exposing, boom, drop the mic moment.
Yeah.
I see him skillfully exposing the hypocrisy of the legalistic frames here. And the reason he's able to do that is because he was attuned to what they were thinking and feeling, and he was able himself to show up in a self-defined way in that context.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for opening that up for us.
And he does it in the context of sharing a meal, right? He doesn't just like go in to put them in their place. Like he's actually sharing a meal.
Yeah, the context is fellowship, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I did, what I said not to do again, which is I sort of opened up the Gospels and started paging through them and just stuck my finger in to see where it landed. And I landed
It's a great way to study it.
I landed in Matthew 19, and once again, there's just several examples. So one example is kind of the trap scenario. They try to trap Jesus on the topic of divorce and remarriage. And in Jesus's day, there were two schools. As some of you may know, there was a school of Shammai and Hillel, and the two famous rabbis. And Shammai basically was very much limiting what was acceptable for divorce. So very restrictive, whereas Hillel was very for almost any reason. I mean, if a wife burned dinner, the husband could, under Hillel's teaching, that's a legitimate reason for divorce. So they're kind of like trying to trap Jesus because no matter what he says, he knows he's going to be, making some people upset. And Jesus responds to this masterfully. He sort of transcends this debate by going back to Genesis 1 and 2 and kind of pointing to God's original design and intention. The degree of self-management that required to not get sucked into the tension surrounding the debate, to see the heart of God and to communicate that in a way that brought about conviction for those that were present and listening is tremendous. Right after that, you get an encounter with the disciples where these little children were wanting to come to Jesus. And as you may know, children had zero status in that cultural day. So they were often kind of pushed to the side and disregarded. And so the disciples are rebuking these children from coming to Jesus, and Jesus, seeing their infinite value and worth, that these children are divine image bearers, ends up rebuking the disciples for preventing them from coming to him. Once again, the amount of self-management that required is through the roof. And then right after that, you have the story of the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and says, hey, what am I lacking? I've done all these things. And Jesus says, well, sell everything you have and come follow me. And the guy goes away sad. And you'll notice Jesus doesn't chase him down when he walks away sad. He doesn't hey, maybe, well, no, I didn't really mean it. Or, hey, what about this? You can reconsider. He names what was required and non-anxiously and didn't seem to have any anxiety about how the rich young ruler freely responded. He didn't try to manipulate him, going back to her. He just kind of let him respond the way out of his own desire and wants.
Yeah, another story is just the whole sequence of events in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is praying. We talked about this in a past episode of being aware of his own intentions. and being willing to still submit those. When he says, not my will, but yours be done. He's sweating blood because he's so stressed. Mm-hmm. He gets up. His disciples had fallen asleep around him. So he's got his own thing going on. There's a lot of internal struggle happening with him. One of his disciples shows up with a bunch of soldiers to come arrest him who had betrayed him. Right? Peter gets mad and he tries to cut off. And if you remember the story, he's swiping the sword at someone and cuts off his ear. I don't think he was probably aiming for his ear.
Probably not a very good swordsman.
Yeah. But Jesus in that moment is able to like know what he's feeling, regulate himself, be aware of what's going on around him, and figure out how he needs to show up in that space.
He heals the guy.
He heals the guy. He gently rebukes Peter, and then like faithfully submits to what he is supposed to do.
Sheesh.
The amount of like awareness and regulation that moment took to me is like a masterclass in this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That is a great example. I mean, Jesus had imagine being in that moment and he's still remaining centered and teaching like kingdom truths.
Yeah.
Despite like this moment of betrayal and all this craziness erupting around it.
Yeah, and he's not ignoring how he feels about it. Mm-hmm. To go back to the awareness piece. He's not ignoring how he feels about it. He just got done sweating blood, which is a pretty major sign of like extreme stress, right? So anyway.
Yeah, I feel like I can't even exhibit that when my kids are whiny and I'm tired. And he does it when his like death is staring him in the face.
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway here, given these 4 quadrants we've covered, is just that you open up the Gospels and it's all, like Jesus is modeling this for us on every page. Mm-hmm. You know.
All right. So, what are some common pitfalls then when it comes to relational management? Where do we fall short? What does this look like to fall short in this?
Yep. I'm going to channel Jim Harrington and Tricia Taylor. And my work with them at the Leader's Journey, because it's all about self-differentiation. I mean, in order to have a high degree of relational management, it's about being able to define yourself and stay connected at the same time. And there's various definitions of self-differentiation, but that's the easiest one that I've heard and am able to remember. And so the 2 common pitfalls where we sort of lose our ability to operate in this quadrant with maturity is when we either define ourselves and are no longer connected, or we prioritize connection but are no longer defined. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Why don't you expand on that?
Yeah. So let's say I define myself but am no longer connected. Maybe one example of that is how many family members have sort of fallen out with one another in the last few years over politics. Right? They have their political position. They're able to define that. But because those political positions are different, they're no longer able to stay relationally connected to each other. Okay? But maybe the opposite would be, hey, someone has a different political conviction than you, and yet you are so concerned that stating your true opinion would like sabotage the relationship or potentially create too much tension in the relationship that you just become agreeable. Mm-hmm. Or you actually adopt their position entirely simply to remain in relationship. Does that make sense? So that'd be kind of like an example of one of each. Whereas a mature relational presence, like Katie, you worked in politics, so you're much more educated than me. But you and I could have some political banter back and forth, and I know that doesn't threaten like our relationship to have a disagreement there. And we both give each other permission to define ourselves differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great and a really good insight. One common scenario that comes to mind with me is like, when you guys make kind of like a new friend, and sometimes when you make a new friend, there's maybe pressure to be more connected, to like emphasize the connection.
Yes.
And at the beginning, it's like, oh, we like all the same things, and look, we're so alike, and all the things.
You like burpees too?
Yeah. Never going to live that down.
Nope.
But then there inevitably becomes a point where, they
Differences
say something
emerge.
and they say something and you're like, wait, what? No, I don't know if I agree with that. Or there's tension, or you have to set a boundary, going back to all the things we just talked about. And I think the question becomes, are you at that moment able to define yourself without totally ghosting the person and withdrawing and never talking to them again because you can't hold tension? Can you define yourself in a way that says, actually, I don't think about it that way. Here's kind of how I see it. And stay relationally connected.
Yeah. I think there are some things we can do where you can define yourself, but you're not doing it in a way that opens up conversation to someone else. Mm-hmm. Who was I just hearing talking about this? I don't know which podcast to reference. I forgot which one it is.
You listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, maybe too many. But they were saying that no matter how sure you are on your position, be willing to keep it open-handed.
Yeah.
Because no human being can be that certain. Unless this is like a mathematical formula like 2 + 2 = 4.
Yep.
We're not necessarily speaking about facts here. Mm-hmm. We're speaking of insights, opinions, perspectives, and being willing to hold it just a little bit open-handed will also hopefully invite the other person to be able to define themselves as well. There's permission to do that in a way of humility.
Well, yeah, I mean, this goes back to how to have conversations where we hold tension. And again, drawing on the leader's journey, one of the things we've talked a lot about as a staff team is talking so that others can hear us. So saying what you think in a way that other people are going to be open and receptive to it. That often involves softening even the things that we feel really confident about, like the way I see it. Or at this point in time, I'm thinking this way about it. Like there's these ways of phrasing things that allow other people to hear what we're trying to say. But then there's also listening in the way that other people can talk. So we need to be able to do both. We need to be able to talk so others can listen, and listen so that other people can talk.
Yeah, and it's worth naming that both of these are valuable, right? Being defined and connected. And anybody who might be listening to this may have a different prescription to work on, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like I may, maybe I have to work in certain circles to be like, I think I sit there quiet when they bring up subjects that are controversial, and I think a mature growth for me would just be being more willing to state my opinion. But someone else,
like me,
might be like, I walk into any room and state my opinion. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. Maybe I need to listen first. Maybe I could work on asking a question across the table before sharing my opinion.
Yeah.
Which I have experienced you do quite a bit on our staff team. I think you realize that you're a strong personality and are very confident, or at least very good at coming across confident when you communicate. So I've witnessed you do that quite a bit, just on staff when there is a discussion and it might be a little tense. You're always careful to make sure I'm going to share my opinion last, because I know that it'll hold too much weight, and all that plays into this.
Well, that has been a growth curve for me, is learning the art of connection in a way that doesn't compromise definition, because defining myself comes very easily to me, given the family I grew up in and my own personality. It's been a lot of work to go, what does it look like to prioritize connection, knowing that the defining piece will always be sort of more automatic.
And I love what you said, Josiah, is that we each have different defaults, but we could also have different defaults in different contexts.
For sure.
So I could also look at my own life and go, yep, I'm really good at defining myself here. But in this context, maybe it's the opposite. And so pressing into whatever would be a growth area for you. All right, so we've given a lot of information, but what would it look like for someone who wanted to grow in relational management? Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, well, how we grow is practice, and this, praxis. Praxis, yes. So obviously, because this is the integration of all that we've talked about, some of the practices we've already covered are still important or are worth repeating. Practice asking good questions. Practice active listening and reflecting back what you're hearing other people say. Observe the room. Observe how other people, what they're saying, what they're not saying. So we've talked about all those things, but they still apply. One thing that I would say is just you need regular space for reflection. One way you can grow in relational management is by creating regular, consistent space to reflect on your relational interactions with other people. We cannot change what we can't see. We can't tame what we can't name, right? There's all these ways. The unexamined life isn't worth living. You need to have space where you're actually examining your interactions with other people, and not just on the observable level. What did he say, and what did she say, and then what did I say? But actually looking inside, what was going on with me in that moment, and how did it impact how I showed up? I don't think we're going to be able to grow in relational management without prioritizing reflection as a way of life.
Yeah. And as a Christian, go ahead. As a follower of Jesus, you've mentioned this before, but the prayer of examine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are ways to be able to do this where you're not just sitting and pondering on your own. You're inviting the Holy Spirit to reflect with you.
Yeah, it's not something you're doing by yourself.
Yeah.
It's you're actually inviting God to lead you in it. Yeah.
And that one can be really difficult. I think it's difficult not only because it can be hard to set aside time, but it can also just be difficult to take an honest look at yourself and invite God into that.
Yeah.
I would repeat for our listeners, that is scary to sometimes look at the moments where we messed up and we know we weren't at our best. Remember, God knows everything about you. He knows more about you than you know about yourself. He knows the darkest places in your life, and he loves you with an infinite, indescribable love.
Yeah.
So there's no corner, crack, or crevice in your life that you're going to shine a light on, that God isn't waiting for you there already with his transforming love.
Yeah.
Dispel the fear and be honest. God's waiting for you there.
Yeah, and along with that, I would say I think probably they kind of go hand in hand, is creating regular space to ask the people in your life for feedback on how they experience you. I know we've mentioned this one before, but just say, hey, I want to grow, and I want you to have permission to tell me if you've experienced me in a certain way. I want to know. I think about this earlier we talked about power dynamics and how they play out, and as a parent, that's the ultimate power dynamic to have to lay down. I don't know about other people, but one of the main reasons why I sometimes will struggle to accept blame or to admit wrong, or at least to relinquish a stance on something, is because you can feel the power dynamic shift within a relationship. You feel you don't realize how much you feel like you have the upper hand in a relationship until you do something wrong or do something that you need to clean up a little bit, or how someone experiences you a certain way. And then instantly, I don't know for you guys, but for me, I have this internal choice. I feel like if I surrender this, I know it means that I'm not going to have this sort of moral upper hand, that I'm the better person here. And that's a hard thing to do, because now that I'm sort of at the mercy of this other person. And I think that's sort of a birthplace for real humility, is being willing to sort of lay that down in the effort to connect with someone else. And I may have to relinquish that power as I hear how someone experienced me, and being willing to own it and realize that it's not necessarily I'm relinquishing the power in order to gain connection and sort of wholeness with someone.
Yeah. So we've talked about reflection, and I hear you saying, and part of the reflection needs to include other people who are truth tellers, because we all have blind spots, things we can't see in our own lives. And I will just tell you, I wouldn't be the kind of leader that I am, and I still have a long ways to go, but I wouldn't be where I am without the three of you sitting in this room and others who aren't in this room telling me the truth about myself. and how you've experienced me particularly in, relational contexts where it was hard or difficult, or we were discussing something a crucial conversation. Having space after staff meetings where we go, how did that go? What did we notice? Those have been some of the best growth moments for me, because I'm no longer just limited by what I noticed or observed in others or myself. And we all need that.
Yeah.
We do. And it's hard work, but good work. Another one I would add, and we've talked about this one in past episodes, but like get a coach or mentor. This can be an official capacity, like maybe you have a therapist or some sort of spiritual director, but it can be more unofficial. Like just find someone who's really good at this and learn from them, right? Find someone who has maturity and build a relationship with them and see if they'll invest in you. Yeah,
and that is not a sign of weakness. I think sometimes our arrogance can get in the way and assume, hey, if I'm really competent or whatever, I don't need someone else but the best leaders are followers first. They learn how to sort of absorb the insights and perspectives of those who are wiser and further along.
And we all have those people.
Yes, we all should have those people, but it takes a high degree of intentionality, and I would say prayer. I mean, you guys, I really mean that, because I know countless people who have went and tried to get a good therapist, and it's not a fit or whatever reason. And, I've been with my therapist for over 12 years, and it was really an answer to prayer. Like I want someone who can help me grow and mature as a leader, who can help me process anything that needs to be processed. And by God's grace, I got connected with someone that is truly great and that I have great chemistry with, But I can personally attest to not only the benefits of that, but just I've had a mentor or certain people that I can call on speed dial outside of my context since I was 18 years old. And all the academic study that I've done in my life doesn't compare to those people that I got proximate to that were further along. I remember way better the lessons I've learned in those environments, and they've helped me grow way faster and become more mature life on life than just sitting there with a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. So much of what it takes to be a good human is not learned in school. All right, guys. Well, let's wrap it up. We talked about a lot today. We talked about the practice of managing self in relationship.
Burpees and moose.
Burpees, moose, and...
Therapist.
We've been working through these 4 buckets, as we've called them, in the EQ realm. And today we talked about the 4th one. So previously we discussed self-awareness, self-regulation, and social awareness. And today we put all of those together and talked about what it looks like to show up in a social environment in a healthy way that is rooted in an understanding of ourselves and other people. So we talked about how people who do this well are able to see the system and can manage themselves and their anxiety within that system, and how that equips people for healthy relationships with others. We talked about the idea of being defined and connected at the same time, knowing who you are and what you think or feel, and maintaining that self-definition while also staying relationally connected to other people. And then lastly, we talked about some practices that you can press into if you're wanting to grow in this area. And so if you're listening and you're looking to grow and to step into relational management, I would just encourage you to choose one of those practices that we talked about and step into it, right? Create some intentional space at the end of the day to reflect, ask for feedback from other people, find someone who has a high degree of maturity in these areas and learn from them.
Yeah, and we've been receiving a lot of positive feedback on this series. So I think our initial plan was to kind of end it here, but we're actually going to keep going. So I hope you guys can join us next time as we take a deeper look at anxiety and how it makes this entire thing super complicated. So we'll see you next time.
Practice is recorded and produced at Crosspoint Community Church. You can find out more about the show and our church at crosspointwi.com. If you have any questions, comments, or have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to send us an email. Also, if you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.